Walt Harris sat in his recliner, the old brown one with the armrest worn smooth by decades of habit, watching the muted flicker of the evening news. His supper, a can of soup, lukewarm, sat mostly untouched on a TV tray stained with coffee rings and forgotten crumbs. The anchor, a young man with perfect teeth and a voice that never trembled, grinned behind the studio desk as video clips played overhead, sleek pods racing through silver tunnels, people cheering, drone shots of construction sites that stretched across the American Midwest. Elon Musk's Hyperloop project, the anchor was saying, has just announced a new line from Chicago to Pittsburgh, expected to move passengers at over 700 miles per hour. Walt leaned forward slightly, squinting. The screen showed a digital simulation of a pod whooshing silently through a transparent tunnel. The future of American high-speed travel, the voice declared with the conviction of prophecy. Walt exhaled through his nose, not quite a scoff, not quite a sigh. He picked up the remote, turned the volume up 2 notches, then changed his mind and turned it back down again. He didn't need to hear it. He'd heard it all before, the promises, the disruption, the bold young faces with their minds set on Mars and their feet barely touching the ground. The world was moving fast now, too fast for old bones and bad knees. Too fast for a man who still paid bills by mailing checks. He glanced at the clock. 7:18 p.m. Just enough daylight to watch it fade. He pushed himself up with a groan and shuffled to the window, pulling back the curtain with 2 fingers. The street outside was quiet. A car passed every few minutes. A kid rode by on a scooter, eyes locked on a phone. Across the street, the Jenkins boy was setting up Halloween decorations even though it was only late August. Walt stared at the blinking skeletons and neon pumpkins with a kind of exhausted disbelief. Inside, the news had moved on to a story about social media trends. He let the curtain fall. In the kitchen, the fridge buzzed a low mechanical hum. He opened it, closed it again. Nothing new inside. Nothing new out there either. Just the march of time, indifferent as gravity. He moved slowly back to his chair, but something caught his eye, a flash of text on the bottom ticker. Musk, impossible is just a starting point. Walt's brow creased. He picked up the remote again, thumb hovering over the rewind button. Instead, he reached for a napkin and scribbled down the quote with a half-dead pen from the drawer. He looked at the words. Impossible is just a starting point. He said it aloud, softly. It felt absurd in his mouth. And yet, it stuck. He stood there, napkin in hand, staring at the scribble like it was something ancient and prophetic. For a moment, the silence of the house was so complete he could hear the buzz of the old ceiling light. The world outside was moving at 700 miles per hour. Inside, time had stopped. He sat back down and stared at the napkin again. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? The question came uninvited, like a whisper in the back of his mind, like a knock at a door long thought sealed shut. He closed his eyes. For a brief instant, he was back in his 20s, hair thick and black, grease under his fingernails, standing beside a train engine with his blueprint clutched in one hand. He had designed it himself, a rail system that used magnetism to reduce friction, a prototype of something that could change everything. But it was 1983, and no one cared what a junior maintenance worker thought. They called him a dreamer. Then he got married. Then the baby came. Then the bills. Dreams waited, then withered. Now, he was 72, and that blueprint, his one shot, was somewhere in the attic, probably yellowed, probably forgotten. He opened his eyes. The room looked the same, but something had shifted, ever so slightly. He looked at the napkin again. Elon Musk had said a lot of things over the years, but this one felt like it had been aimed directly at him. He stood again, slower this time, and shuffled down the hall to the back of the house. The attic door creaked when he pulled the cord. The ladder groaned under his weight. Dust greeted him like an old rival. He coughed and turned on the single bulb that dangled like a forgotten sun in the center of the space. Boxes, crates, plastic tubs labeled in fading Sharpie. He began to dig. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. He moved like a man possessed, driven by something he couldn't yet name. Then he found it, a long, flat portfolio wrapped in twine and sealed with a brittle strip of masking tape. He pulled it open. The blueprint, folded like a secret, stared up at him with lines and notations in his own young handwriting. He ran his fingers over the paper. It was crude. It was dated. But it was his. He took it downstairs, cleared the table, and laid it out. The lines were straight, the vision clear. He remembered how he'd imagined trains that didn't screech, that floated. Back then, it was science fiction. Now, Musk was doing it. The world had caught up. The question wasn't whether the idea had been good. The question was whether he still mattered. He stared at the blueprint until the edges of it blurred. Then he sat back, rubbed his face, and laughed. It was a dry, surprised laugh, like a pilot testing his voice after years of silence. He looked at the clock again. 9:02 p.m. He hadn't felt this awake in weeks. He picked up the blueprint, the napkin quote still clutched in his hand, and carried both into the garage. The overhead light flickered to life. The workbench was dusty but intact. The tools, still hung with military precision, waited. He ran his hand along a row of wrenches, felt the cold steel. He set the blueprint down and just looked. He wasn't sure what he would do next. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a stir of something deeper than memory. Purpose, maybe. Or possibility. Outside, the wind shifted. A leaf skittered across the driveway. Inside, Walt Harris stood alone in his garage, holding a blueprint he'd drawn 40 years ago, beneath a quote scribbled on a napkin from a man building the future. He didn't know what it meant yet. Only that something had changed. A door had cracked open. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to walk through it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walt Harris hadn't slept much, but when he woke up, he didn't feel tired, he felt something closer to alive. The kind of awake that buzzed low in his chest like a distant motor warming up. Sunlight broke through the blinds in slanted bars across the kitchen table where the blueprint still lay, unfurled and waiting. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, the kind he'd stopped drinking years ago because of the acidity, but this morning it felt right. He sipped it and looked at the lines he'd drawn in 1983 with a pencil and a ruler, long before digital design and simulation software and hashtags. The sketch showed a suspended rail system supported by magnetized runners, designed to glide at high speeds with minimal resistance. It wasn't a Hyperloop, not exactly, but the principles were familiar now, almost prophetic. He could remember every detail of how it came to be, late nights spent in the back room of the depot, working off old textbooks and scribbled calculations while the other guys played cards or smoked in the yard. He was 29, wiry, stubborn, always talking about the future. Back then, he believed it was just a matter of time before someone noticed. But no one ever did. The morning sun crawled higher. Dust floated like lazy sparks in the beam of light. Walt turned the page of an old notebook beside the blueprint and found his original specs, marked in pen with a younger version of his own initials, WH83. He touched them with a strange reverence, like they'd been left by another man, one with hair, with fire, with momentum. Somewhere in the attic, there was a box of photos that went with these notebooks. He remembered one in particular, him and Eric, back when Eric was 8, holding up a small foam model of the train they'd built together out of scrap wood and refrigerator magnets. He remembered how Eric's eyes lit up when the model glided an inch off the rails. "It floats, Dad," the boy had shouted. "You made it float." It had been a good day, one of the last before the walls started going up. Eric was brilliant, even then, and the two of them had spent hours in that garage making small things out of big dreams. But time is like rust, it doesn't need permission to spread. Work got harder. Money got tight. Walt started turning down evenings in the garage for double shifts on the line. Eric grew older and started to dream without him. There was no fight, not really. Just the slow, silent erosion of something once full of light. Walt took another sip of coffee. He hadn't seen Eric in 12 years. The last time they spoke, it was about his wife's funeral, and even that conversation had been brief, functional. They were both grieving in their own ways, and somehow that meant grieving separately. The blueprint seemed to glow a little in the soft morning light, as if trying to say something. Back when I mattered, Walt said aloud to the empty room, the words surprising him with their suddenness. He set the mug down and walked to the hallway, his joints popping in quiet protest. The photo albums were in the hall closet, tucked between boxes of Christmas ornaments and old power tools. He pulled one out, flipped it open, and found the picture within the first few pages. There they were, Walt and Eric, in the garage, smiling through dust and sunlight, holding that little train model like it was a ticket to another world. Walt sat on the floor and stared at it. His hand trembled slightly, not with emotion, but with the faint, familiar twitch he tried not to notice lately. The doctor had mentioned something about early symptoms last year, but Walt hadn't followed up. What was the point? It wasn't like they could reverse time. But maybe time didn't need reversing. Maybe it just needed rerouting. He went back to the kitchen, laid the photo next to the blueprint, and stared at them both. The coffee had gone cold. A thought had begun to press at him all morning, quietly but persistently, like a tap on the shoulder he'd been ignoring. What if he sent the blueprint to someone? Just one person. Not to pitch, not to beg, but just to say, this was once an idea. It still might be. He wasn't looking for a job or applause. He just wanted someone to see it. Really see it. But who? He turned on the old desktop computer in the study. It wheezed to life like a machine resurrected from the grave. The email tab opened slowly. His inbox was filled with spam, newsletters, and an invitation to his 35th high school reunion, which had already passed. He typed into the search bar, Hyperloop Contact Engineering Team. The results weren't helpful. Most were media links or articles. He clicked through them one by one, finding nothing but polished press statements and investor relations pages. Then he tried something else, Hyperloop student design competitions. That got him further. A link to a university consortium popped up, a joint project between Stanford, MIT, and a few Midwest schools. There was a "Submit Your Ideas" form at the bottom of the page. He hesitated. His finger hovered over the mouse. What if it was a joke? What if no one ever looked? What if they laughed? But then again, what if they didn't? He uploaded a scan of the blueprint, added a short note, "This is a design I created in 1983. I worked on rail systems for 40 years. Maybe it's useful. Maybe not. But I figured someone ought to see it before it's lost." He didn't sign it with his full name. Just, W. Harris, Ohio. He clicked submit and sat back, exhaling like he'd just released something heavy he'd been carrying since the Reagan administration. He didn't expect anything. He wasn't delusional. But it felt good just to know it was out there now, his idea, floating in the ether, waiting to be found. The phone rang later that afternoon. Not a person. Just an automated survey. But still, it startled him. It had been weeks since the phone rang for any real reason. He walked out into the garage, still half-lit from the day before, the overhead bulb flickering softly. The model train sat on a shelf, dusty but intact. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands. The foam had yellowed, the magnet still clung to the base. He set it on the workbench and gave it a gentle push. It moved half an inch and stopped. He smiled. Not quite high speed. But then again, it wasn't about speed. It was about movement. That evening, the news played another clip from Musk's recent event. This time he watched it with the sound on. Elon stood in front of a massive render of the Hyperloop station. "We need ideas that don't care how old you are," Musk said. "We need ideas that solve problems, not just impress investors. If you've got a better way to do it, we want to hear from you." Walt sat very still. The napkin with the quote was still on the table. Impossible is just a starting point. He thought of the photo. The model. The blueprint. The email he'd sent. He looked down at his hands, lined with veins and time, but steady now. For the first time in a long while, he felt like a man with something to do. He stood, moved toward the garage again. This time, he turned on both lights. The full space lit up like a stage waiting for its actor. He pulled out his measuring tools, found his ruler, checked the drawer for his old soldering kit. It was there, tucked under a can of motor oil. He set everything on the bench, arranged like a ritual. He was going to build it again, not the full system, of course. Just a better model. Just enough to prove it could work. Maybe Eric would see it. Maybe not. But someone would. Someone needed to. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to matter. The following morning, Walt Harris stepped outside and felt a chill that wasn't entirely from the air. September had crept in overnight, bringing with it the sharp scent of early fall, damp leaves, dry bark, something faintly electric in the wind. He stood on his porch for a moment, taking it all in, holding a mug of instant coffee that tasted more like habit than anything else. He watched a squirrel run along the phone wire, daring gravity. The road was empty, save for the occasional car pulling through the intersection at the far end of the block. Life moved slowly here, the kind of slow that used to feel comforting but now felt like a waiting room. His garage light was still on. Inside, the model sat on the workbench, newly cleaned, carefully repaired with fresh adhesive and a magnet alignment tweak that had taken him nearly 3 hours to figure out the night before. He had documented the entire process with an old camcorder, not because he thought anyone would watch, but because it felt like honoring the work. He'd even rehearsed a few lines. "This is Walt Harris, and I built this magnetic rail prototype in 1983, but each time he played it back, his voice sounded strange, foreign, like someone imitating an old man." He didn't upload it. Not yet. He had bigger things on his mind. That afternoon, the local library was hosting a public forum on the proposed Hyperloop route, specifically, how it would affect smaller towns like his. The idea was to build public enthusiasm, answer questions, and quell fears from folks worried about eminent domain or construction noise. Most of Walt's neighbors wouldn't go. They'd complain about it over dinner or mutter something about billionaires playing with toys, but they wouldn't show up. Walt was going. Not to complain. Just to see. Just to listen. Maybe, if the moment was right, to say something. He put on a collared shirt that still fit mostly okay and a pair of slacks he hadn't worn since his wife's memorial. He even combed his hair and used the aftershave that smelled faintly of pine and stubborn optimism. The library was only 6 blocks away, but he drove. The walk would have been too long, and his knees had started aching in the mornings more than usual. The community room was fuller than he expected. Maybe 30 people. A handful of young professionals in blazers stood near a projector screen that displayed a looping animation of a Hyperloop pod gliding through a stylized Midwest landscape. The animation was slick, the kind of thing you'd see in a startup pitch deck. Walt took a seat in the third row, behind a couple of retirees whispering to each other about all this fancy mess. The meeting started with a woman in her 30s introducing herself as a regional project coordinator. Her tone was friendly but polished, practiced. She talked about speed, sustainability, economic growth. She mentioned job creation, regional access, smart transit corridors. Walt listened carefully, nodding to himself every so often. The technical terms weren't new to him. He knew how systems worked. Knew how they failed too. Then the Q&A began. A man in the back stood up and asked if the project was just another way for rich people to avoid traffic. A woman wanted to know if her property taxes would go up. A teenager asked about internships. Then Walt raised his hand. The coordinator nodded politely. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Walt stood slowly. His voice was steady but quiet. My name's Walt Harris. I used to work rail maintenance out of Cleveland. 40 years on the lines. I saw a lot of good systems, and a lot of bad ones too. What you folks are building, it's impressive. Real impressive. But I have a question that's maybe less about the tech and more about the people. The room quieted. He continued. Seems to me, these big ideas, they always talk about the future, and that's fine. But where's the part where the people who helped build the last system are invited into the new one? Not as passengers, but as contributors. A few people murmured. The coordinator gave a professional smile, the kind that tried to look grateful but came off cautious. That's a great question, Mr. Harris. We're absolutely looking for community involvement and welcome input from, yeah, but are you actually looking? Walt said, gently. Or are you just waiting for resumes to come from Stanford and MIT? Silence again. The coordinator blinked, caught slightly off script. Someone behind Walt chuckled softly. But then the coordinator nodded, more sincerely this time. You're right. We talk about inclusion, but we don't always know how to include the people who laid the foundation. That's something we need to work on. And if you've got experience or ideas, Mr. Harris, we'd love to hear them. After the meeting, come see me. Walt sat down slowly. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He just wanted to be seen. To be counted. After the meeting, a few people approached him. One of the young engineers asked about his time on the rails. Walt told him about the winters in Ohio when the tracks would freeze so hard you could hear them crack at night like gunshots. About the summer heat that made the steel hum and buckle like it was breathing. He didn't mention the blueprint. Not yet. The coordinator gave him her card and said she'd pass along his comments. She smiled, genuinely this time, and told him, don't think nobody noticed. On the drive home, Walt felt something strange in his chest. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Like a coal-catching spark. Like momentum. That night, back in the garage, he opened a new browser window and searched, how to film a demo video. He found a site that explained camera angles and lighting, even how to talk without sounding like you were reading off a cue card. He read it all, then practiced. The camera, still his old camcorder, was balanced on a stack of paint cans. He hit record. This is Walt Harris. I built this magnetic rail model in 1983. I've worked on trains my whole life. This isn't the Hyperloop, but it's not far off. I'm not saying it's perfect. But maybe there's something in here worth building on. Worth remembering. He paused. Then added, almost offhand, sometimes the future just needs a little help from the past. He stopped the recording. Rewound it. Watched it. He didn't hate it. His voice didn't sound so foreign this time. The lines on his face didn't look like decay. They looked like a map. He uploaded the video to a site Jasmine, the neighbor girl, had told him about. You can share anything there, she'd said. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just real. He clicked upload. Titled it, Magnetic Rail Prototype, From the Rust Belt to the Future. He didn't expect views. But something in him said, put it out there. Let it ride. He went to bed that night tired but light, as if part of him had finally stretched after decades of being folded in. He dreamed of the old rail yard, of sparks and motion and voices calling his name not to hurry up, but to step forward. Like maybe, just maybe, the train wasn't leaving without him after all. Walt Harris didn't expect anyone to watch the video. Maybe Jasmine. Maybe a handful of students from that Hyperloop panel. But by the next morning, when he opened his email and saw over 50 unread messages and the view count sitting just above 4,000, something inside him kicked, something old and sharp and young all at once. He blinked at the screen as if it might correct itself. But no, there it was. Dozens of comments. Names he didn't recognize. Sentences like, "My granddad would have loved this," and, "Can someone get this man on a panel," and, "This is exactly what modern engineering needs, real-world wisdom." He read each one slowly, carefully, as if they might vanish if he rushed. There were questions, too. Technical ones. A student from Purdue asking about his choice of magnet spacing. A teacher in Iowa wanting to show the video to her shop class. Even someone from a startup in Detroit offering to chat about retired systems thinkers. That phrase stuck with him, systems thinker. He liked how it sounded. Not technician. Not has-been. A thinker. Like a man with something to offer. Still in his robe, coffee in hand, Walt walked into the garage and looked at the model on the bench. It seemed brighter this morning, like it had finally been invited to the conversation. He picked it up gently and gave it a push. It slid, smooth and silent. Not high speed. But not bad. Not bad at all. His phone buzzed, he still wasn't used to that, and he saw a new comment come in on the video, "Just watch this." Blown away. You ever consider doing a live Q&A? Walt stared at it for a moment, unsure what a live Q&A even looked like. He didn't know how to stream anything. He barely knew how to attach a file. But he remembered something Jasmine had said weeks ago when helping him update the garage's Wi-Fi, "You don't need to know everything, Walt. You just need to start." So he walked across the street where Jasmine lived with her older brother and knocked on the door. She opened it, earbuds in, a laptop in one hand and a bagel in the other. "Walt? Got a second?" he asked. "Maybe 20. She smiled. "Sure thing, old man." Back in the garage, he showed her the video, the comments, the messages. She grinned wide. "Walt. You're kind of viral. Is that a good thing?" "Very. Kind of like. You just made it to the front page of the internet's brain." He wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but her excitement was contagious. She helped him set up a live Q&A stream for the next evening, showed him where to click, how to test his microphone, how to angle the light. "Just be yourself," she said. "That's what people liked. You weren't trying to sound smart. You just are." He felt something stir in his chest again, an emotion he hadn't named in a long time. Confidence. Not pride. Not arrogance. Just the simple feeling of being allowed to show up. The next night, he wore a clean button-down shirt and sat at the bench with the model in the background. Jasmine was nearby, helping monitor the screen. When the countdown hit 0, they were live. Dozens of faces popped up in little icons, some just names, some students, some with usernames like Maglev Maniac and TrainBrain84. The chat lit up with greetings. "Hi Walt. Thanks for doing this. You're a legend." Walt smiled nervously. "Evening," he began. "I'm Walt Harris. You probably saw the video. I didn't expect all this, to be honest. But I'm real glad you're here." Questions rolled in. Some technical. Some personal. One person asked what inspired him back in the 80s. He told them about riding trains with his father as a boy, watching the world blur past. Another asked what he thought of Elon Musk. Walt paused. "I think he's got guts," he said finally. "I think he looks at problems and sees puzzles. And I think maybe we need more of that, people who look at the future like it's something you build with your own hands." The chat responded with heart emojis and clapping gifs. Another question. "What's one thing you'd tell your younger self?" Walt leaned back, looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Don't wait for someone to tell you it matters," he said. "If you believe in something, build it. Even if nobody's watching. Even if it takes 40 years. When the stream ended after nearly an hour, the view count was at 12,000. Jasmine was practically bouncing. "Walt, they loved you. Did you see what that engineer from Boston said? They want to feature your model in their next webinar." Walt just sat there for a moment, taking it all in. "I didn't think anyone would care," he said quietly. "They care," she said. "You gave people something real." The next morning, another email came in. This one had a corporate logo in the corner, one Walt vaguely recognized from a tech news piece a few weeks ago. The sender was a project lead working on one of the regional Hyperloop connector stations. They'd seen the video. "Would you be interested in discussing your connector design in more detail?" it said. "We're exploring legacy ideas and applications from outside conventional sources. Your background is exactly what we're hoping to bring in." Walt stared at the message for a long time. Not because he didn't believe it. But because, somehow, he did. He typed a careful reply. "I'd be happy to talk. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a man who's spent his life thinking about how to move things from here to there. But if that's useful, I'm in." He signed it, this time, fully, Walt Harris, Retired Rail Systems Maintenance, Ohio. That afternoon, while sweeping the garage, he found something he hadn't seen in years, a small plastic badge from the 1994 Ohio Rail Expo. It had his name on it, barely legible now, and the word "Innovator" in bold blue print. He held it in his hand and chuckled softly. Innovator. Maybe it wasn't a lie after all. Later that evening, he sat on the porch with the blueprint on his lap, listening to the distant hum of cars, the same old neighborhood sounds he'd heard for decades. But something had changed. The world hadn't slowed down. He had caught up. Or maybe the world had circled back just enough for someone like him to matter again. He thought about his son. Thought about how proud he would have been to show Eric the comments, the video, the people asking questions. He wondered if Eric had seen it. Part of him hoped so. Part of him feared it. He hadn't reached out again since the last voicemail months ago. He hadn't wanted to push. But maybe now, maybe it was time. He stood up slowly, joints stiff but strong enough, and walked inside. He opened his phone, clicked on the old contact, and hit record message. His voice was steady. "Hey, Eric. It's Dad. I know it's been a while. I just wanted to say. I shared that old model. You remember, the one we built when you were a kid? People liked it. They really liked it. Thought maybe you'd want to see. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know I'm still building things. Still dreaming. Hope you're well." He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he walked back to the garage, turned on the light, and started sketching. There were new ideas forming now. Not just what he'd done, but what might come next. Walt Harris woke up before dawn the next day, not out of habit, but because something in his chest felt too full to sleep. He'd never understood people who said they woke up excited for the day ahead. That had always sounded like marketing language or something from a television preacher, but this morning, he got it. It wasn't excitement exactly, more like a steady, rising hum. A quiet readiness. He got dressed without even turning the lights on, moving through muscle memory honed by decades of 4 a.m. shifts and early freight calls. The kitchen was still, dark except for the amber glow of the stove clock. 5:02, He poured water into the old percolator and stood watching it until the first bubble started to pop. Outside, the world hadn't started yet. But Walt had. He took his mug to the garage, flicked the light on, and stood for a moment in the doorway like a man entering a chapel. The bench, the blueprint, the small magnetic model, all waiting like old friends. He hadn't touched the blueprint since the live stream. Not because he was done with it, but because something new had started to form in his head, something that pulled from the original but moved past it. A design that took into account what the Hyperloop was now, compressed air, near vacuum tubes, linear induction motors, but grounded it in practical mechanics, stuff you could actually build and maintain without needing a $10 million lab. What had always fascinated Walt wasn't just speed. It was friction, or more importantly, how to remove it. That was the enemy. The thing that slowed things down, wore them out, broke them over time. He knew about friction. In metal. In people. In years. But what if a small station in Ohio could be designed without it? Not the pod or the main tunnel, that was out of his league, but the connector. The loading system. The last mile, as they called it. A smooth, efficient transfer point that didn't choke the system but fed it with grace. No one was thinking about that part. But he was. He sat down and started sketching. No ruler this time, just a pencil and a pad of thick, slightly yellow paper he'd found in a drawer yesterday. He worked slow, methodical, stopping only to sip coffee or scratch at the back of his head. It felt like building a bridge back to something he'd forgotten, flow, focus, the joy of making things that just worked. Around 9 a.m., the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, area code from California. He picked it up, cautious but curious. Mr. Harris? This is Dr. Lena Voss from Aurora Transit, one of the design partners on the Hyperloop Midwest Loop. I hope I'm not catching you too early. Her voice was clear, sharp, friendly but professional. Not at all, Walt said. I was just, he looked at his sketches. Working on something. That's good to hear, she replied. We came across your video, your Q&A, and frankly, the way you think about infrastructure, it's rare. We'd like to invite you to join a virtual roundtable we're hosting next week. It's not press. It's internal. Engineers, designers, a couple of folks from logistics and public transit. We want perspectives like yours. Legacy thinkers with field experience. Walt paused. Well, I'm not sure I'm exactly roundtable material. Mr. Harris, I've spent 15 years in advanced transportation. I've reviewed thousands of proposals. Most of them sound like wish lists made by people who've never repaired a rail in the dead of winter. Your model, your language, it's grounded. It's real. That's the material we want. If you're willing, we'll send you the link and let you preview the agenda. He agreed. Thanked her. Hung up. Then sat still for several minutes, stunned not by the invitation, but by how easy the word, yes, had come out of his mouth. A week ago, he wouldn't have dared to think he had anything left to offer beyond memory. Now he was sketching again. Now people were calling. He looked down at the sheet on his desk. A side view of a low-friction loading dock that used magnetic alignment instead of traditional guides. Simple. Efficient. Scalable. And entirely possible. He grabbed another sheet and kept going. Hours passed. At some point, Jasmine came by with a sandwich and a bottle of iced tea. You forgot to eat, she said, handing it to him through the garage door. Again. Am I that predictable? You're that inspired, she grinned. Everyone's talking about you, you know. My whole class saw the stream. They want you to come in and speak. Some of the engineering kids, they're already printing 3D models based on your prototype. Walt chuckled, touched the edge of the sandwich. Tell them to be careful. It's all smoke and magnets. They think it's gold. She paused. So do I. After she left, he ate slowly, then set the sketchpad aside and opened his email again. There was another message. This one from a name that made his breath catch. Eric Harris. Subject, Dad. No other text preview. He clicked it. The message opened with a single sentence, I saw the video. That was it. Just that. Walt stared at the screen, unsure how to breathe. He read it again, then again, hoping more words would appear. They didn't. But the message had weight. The kind that filled a room. He hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to reply instantly, pour everything out. Another part told him to wait, to think. He closed the laptop and stood. Went outside. The sun was beginning to tip toward the horizon, washing the street in gold. He sat on the porch steps, elbows on knees, watching the leaves rustle at the edge of the sidewalk. A dog barked 2 houses down. A pickup drove by, music thumping through closed windows. Normal sounds. But nothing felt normal. After a while, he went back inside and wrote a reply. Thank you for watching. That means more than I can say. If you ever want to talk about it, or about anything, I'd like that. He stared at it for a full minute, then hit send. It was enough. For now. That night, he didn't go to the garage. He didn't check his email again. He sat in the living room, the old TV playing something he wasn't really watching, and he just let the day settle. Something had shifted. Not suddenly, but deeply. Like a river slowly changing course. He thought of Elon Musk, not the man on stage, not the billionaire, but the mindset. The idea that failure wasn't the end, but data. That limits were invitations. That age, like gravity, was just another force to push against. Walt didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to build things that worked. And now, for the first time in a long time, people wanted to see. He thought of Eric again. Thought of the garage and the model they'd built together all those years ago. He could still hear his son's 8-year-old voice yelling, "It floats." That voice was far away now. But maybe not lost. Maybe, if he kept building, if he kept showing up, that voice would find its way back. In the quiet of the living room, the old house settling with its familiar creaks and sighs, Walt Harris leaned back in his recliner, looked out the window into the night, and let himself believe in the future, not the fast one in tubes and tunnels, but the slow one, the patient one, built one decision at a time. The morning of the round table came quietly. No dramatic sunrise, no stirring music in Walt Harris's ears. Just the low hum of the fridge, the creak of floorboards, and the distant bark of the neighbor's dog. Yet there was something different in the way Walt moved. His hands didn't tremble when he shaved. He took time buttoning his shirt. He used the good mug, the ceramic one with the faded Cleveland and Western logo. Outside, the sky was a soft, pale blue. Clean. Like the world had pressed reset. The virtual roundtable was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Jasmine helped him set up the camera, checked the lighting, coached him through muting and unmuting, and even made sure the garage looked less like a hardware store and more like a workspace. "You're going to be great," she said, her voice firm, almost protective. "Just talk like you're showing me something cool." He nodded. The invite had come from Aurora Transit's design lead, Dr. Lena Voss, but the list of attendees was much longer: engineers from Colorado, transit officials from Illinois, someone from a think tank in D.C., and a handful of younger designers whose titles Walt didn't even understand. But they all had one thing in common: they'd watched his video. They'd seen the model. They were, in some way, interested in what a retired railman from Ohio had to say. At 9:58, he clicked the join link. The screen flickered, and suddenly there they were, little windows filled with faces, some polished and professional, others in hoodies and coffee-stained t-shirts. Dr. Voss smiled as she saw him appear. "Walt Harris," she said, her tone warm. "Glad you could make it." "Happy to be here," Walt replied. "Still getting used to all this technology, but I'll do my best." "We're just happy you're here," she said again, and introduced him to the room. They didn't ask him to present a paper or give a speech. Instead, they pulled up his original video and played a clip. Then someone said, "Walt, we wanted to start by asking, how did you think up that connector idea?" Walt leaned slightly toward the camera. "Well," he began, "when I was working track maintenance, one of the biggest issues we had wasn't with the train or the rail, it was with the junctions. The parts where one system met another. That's where the trouble showed up. Misalignment, drag, wear and tear. So when I looked at what you all are building, Hyperloop tubes, levitating pods, clean energy systems, I couldn't help but think, how are people actually going to get on and off this thing?" Heads nodded on screen. Walt continued, gaining confidence. "I figured the station systems, those last-mile connectors, had to be just as frictionless as the pods themselves. So I started thinking magnets. Controlled loading platforms. Ways to guide without grinding." A younger man named Devin, an engineer from Boston, raised a hand. "Did you factor in thermal expansion in your mock-up?" "That was one of the things we ran into during our trial runs, alignment shifts in cold weather regions." Walt's face lit up. "Absolutely. That's why I use spring-loaded mounts in my original prototype. Back in the day, we had to account for frost-heave and sun kinks. You don't want a system so tight that it can't breathe." Another screen lit up, someone from Colorado, a transit logistics officer. "Mr. Harris, we've spent years trying to simplify platform interchange systems. Your dock idea is brilliant in its simplicity. Have you thought about what materials might scale it?" "Not fully," Walt admitted. "But I've been sketching. I was thinking of a composite. Maybe carbon steel with a graphene overlay. Something that could flex without fatigue." The screen went quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Voss spoke up. "That's exactly the conversation we've been trying to have," she said. "Most of the proposals we see are over-engineered. Yours reminds us that function is the root of innovation." Walt's throat tightened a little. "Well," he said, voice low, "I've had a lot of time to think about what didn't work." For the next hour, the conversation flowed like a current. Walt answered questions. Asked a few himself. Shared stories about field repairs and railyard workarounds. And slowly, something happened. He stopped feeling like a guest and started feeling like a peer. These weren't just engineers. They were builders. Like him. When the session wrapped, Dr. Voss looked directly into the camera. "Walt, if you're open to it, I'd like to formally invite you to collaborate with us on the Midwest Connector prototype. We need a frictionless dock for stations across Ohio and Indiana. Your system, or something derived from it, could be the foundation." Walt's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded slowly. "I'd be honored," he said. "Long as I'm not just window dressing. I want to do the work." "That's why we're asking," she replied. When the screen faded and the call ended, Walt sat in silence for a long time. His hands rested on the desk, fingertips pressed against the wood like he needed to feel the grain of reality beneath him. He'd been asked to help design part of the next American transit system. At 71. With no degrees. No credentials. Just memory, experience, and an old sketch pad. Jasmine burst into the garage minutes later, face glowing. "I watched from my phone. Walt, you're in. They want you." He smiled, eyes misting just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "They do." That night, he pulled the old blueprint from its protective sleeve and spread it out once more across the garage bench. The paper was yellowed, creased, and marked with decades of notes, but it felt alive again. Not a relic. A starting point. He began revising it. Not copying. Evolving. He drew wider platforms, integrated safety systems, redundancy modules. He researched sensors, signal failsafes, and emergency evacuation plans. Slowly, his hand traced the lines of something new, not just technology, but purpose. A future he could help shape. A knock at the door startled him. It was late, near 10. He opened it cautiously. On the porch stood a man with dark hair, a jacket slung over one shoulder. Walt stared at him. His heart hitched. "Eric?" The man smiled, uncertain, sheepish. "Hey, Dad." Walt couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Eric said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I saw the Q&A. The Hyperloop stuff. I watched the whole thing. Twice." Walt's voice came out hoarse. You came all the way here." "I figured maybe it was time," Eric said. "And I wanted to see the model again." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Walt stepped aside and held the door open. "Come on in," he said. "I've got a lot to show you." Eric followed, his footsteps familiar and strange all at once. In the garage, he paused in front of the bench. The model sat there, humming faintly. "Still floats," Eric said, his voice soft. "Still does," Walt replied. They stood there, side by side, in the warm light of the garage, surrounded by blueprints, sketches, tools, and the quiet, relentless hum of a dream reborn. Walt and Eric stood side by side under the harsh garage light, the room suspended between past and future, between the echo of old ideas and the hum of possibility. Walt saw his son's eyes tracing the lines he'd redrawn, saw the flicker of understanding, maybe even pride. Eric cleared his throat and turned to face his father fully for the first time in years. The silence felt significant, the meter ticking toward something neither one of them knew how to say. Eric looked at the model, then back at the sketches spread across the bench, hands clutching the edge like he needed point of contact. "This is amazing, Dad," he said finally, voice careful. You really built all of this yourself?" Walt nodded. "Started in '83. Then sketched it again last month." He swallowed. "It's been a long road." Eric rubbed his hand over the foam of the model, his voice quieter in the stillness. "I'm sorry I left," he said. "I didn't mean to disappear. After Mom, I didn't know how to stay." Walt's chest tightened. He watched his son's eyes, how they glistened in the tungsten glow. The words came out without warning. "You didn't leave me, Eric. You chased your own way forward. I get that now." Eric's jaw flexed. "I never thought you'd still be building," he said. "I thought that dream ended years ago." Walt reached out, placed a hand on Eric's shoulder. "It never did." They didn't say more because they didn't need to. The garage had already said it all, in the layout of tools, in the blueprint-turned-live project, in the dusty model that still glided across the bench. Eric stood straighter, as if rediscovering himself in the air around it. I wouldn't even know where to start," Eric said after a moment. "Let me help you." Walt smiled, slow and sad and hopeful all at once. "Let's finish this together." They stayed until midnight, sketching, comparing notes, talking about magnetic loaders, sensor arrays, modular station designs. Words came easier than they had in years, ideas instead of guilt, possibilities instead of space. By the time they shut off the lights, there was a new line on the drawing, Station Aligned Dock version 2.0, labeled in wavering but determined strokes. Walt still couldn't believe it, his son had come back and they were welding ideas again, sketching not just mechanics, but repair bays and emergency walkways, safety diagnostics built into the connectors. Nothing was promised, nothing was settled, but they had, together, rewritten part of the story. The next morning, Walt felt the kind of ache you earn in your bones. Not exhaustion, but the gentle proof of light. He made coffee while his mind traced the draft of Station Align Dock version 2.0. He recalled the invitation, prototype development, station systems across the Midwest. He thought of the magnet dock in his sketch. He thought of Eric beside him, moving with intention. Outside, the morning stretched in gold light. He watched cars pass and leaves rustle, felt not nostalgia, but presence, rooted, real. The day passed in a blur of emails, sketches, and approvals. By noon, he was part of a small working group, Aurora Transit, the Midwest prototyping team, some student advisors, and now Walt and Eric. Their connector design had moved from sketch to concept. Photography, CAD renderings, materials analysis, pieces bubbling into place across digital and physical space. At some point, Walt looked over at his son, saw the way Eric's eyes narrowed with focus, hands steady at a mouse, building a 3D module from their sketch. Their team chat pinged, next meeting. Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Prototype review. Zoom link below. He sent a message to Jasmine, "You're not gonna believe who's drawing in my project." "I can," she wrote back. "Go, Dad." That evening, after dinner, the two of them went back to that place of light and tools. They tested a set of rollers that mimicked magnetic alignment, traced the smoothness of movement, checked tolerances. The model skated across benches and tables, silent, smooth, no catching, no friction. They made notes. They sketched improvements. The air felt warm with something they couldn't name. A quiet thread of trust, of repressed hope sewn back together. Late that night, Walt sat alone with the original blueprint, the one from '83. It was yellow and fragile now, the edges brittle but edges still carrying his handwriting, his notations about friction tolerance, rail spacing. He placed it next to the current prototype sheet. 2 generations of thinking laid out side by side, lines onto lines, ink onto ink, memory onto possibility. The future felt not foreign but familiar. And he felt, for the first time in decades, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A few days later, the prototype team gathered via video again, this time to review 3D renders and stress tests. The designs were crisp, mechanical plates that clicked into magnetic interfaces, raised rails, emergency detachers, load sensors. Dr. Voss and other engineers nodded in approval. To Walt, it felt different this time. The respect wasn't polite. It was real. One woman from logistics said, "This could cut platform dwell times by 40%. It's not just elegant, it's scalable." Walt sat back in his chair, looking at the mess of wires, monitors, and image grids before him. His heart beat soft. "If it works," he said in a whisper to the screen, "I'll eat a lifetime of humble pie." The design team laughed. It felt joyful instead of hollow. When the session ended, he turned to Eric, who raised a smile, quiet, proud. Eric's message arrived late that evening, "Dad. I want to keep working on this. Let me help with the math. The CAD runs. Whatever." Walt stared at it, felt something settle in his chest. He replied, "Lead engineer." And meant it. The next morning, he started with 2 cups of coffee and a fresh sketch pad and thought, impossible is just a starting point. He'd built things before. But never something this alive. The prototype arrived in 3 flat boxes, shipped overnight from a fabrication lab in Chicago. Walt watched the delivery driver place them carefully on his porch like they were carrying a newborn. Each box was stamped with Aurora Transit, Priority Engineering Sample, in bright orange. It had been decades since anything with that kind of official weight had been addressed to him. He stood over the boxes for a moment, just breathing, absorbing what it meant. Then he carried them into the garage one by one, his arms strong despite the ache in his joints, and laid them across the workbench. Eric joined him minutes later, breathless from jogging down the block where he'd gone to get fresh coffee. "They came?" he asked, already setting his drink down to grab a box cutter. Walt nodded, still in disbelief. They came. Together, they opened the boxes. Inside, nested in foam, were the first real components of their aligned-dock system: polished carbon steel rails, magnetic brackets, and a control unit roughly the size of a car battery. Walt ran his fingers over the cool metal, the precision edges, the engraved serial code, ADMW V1.0. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he'd needed to touch it, to feel it as something more than idea or theory. "These are beautiful," Eric said, almost reverently. "We actually made this." "You made the render," Walt said. "I just had the stubborn memory to guide it." They spent the next 2 hours assembling the parts on the long bench, laying each component exactly according to the updated diagram they'd submitted to Aurora's prototype team. The magnetic brackets snapped into place with a satisfying click. The rollers moved like glass on glass. When they finally powered up the control unit, the alignment light blinked green. "Signal's clean," Eric said, checking the laptop. "Sensor response is tight. Within spec." Walt tapped the control button. The prototype's loading arm glided forward and locked into position against a mock passenger pod they'd fashioned from foam board and rails. The tolerance was perfect, zero misalignment, no visible wobble. It wasn't just working. It was real. Walt stepped back, wiped his hands on a cloth, and looked at it like it was the most important machine he'd ever helped build. "This'll hold," he said. "It's not fancy, but it'll hold." Eric grinned. "It's clean. Intuitive. It's what they need." "It's what we needed," Walt said quietly. Something that worked. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving old regrets. He was moving. Building. Collaborating. The project had given him more than purpose, it had given him a new way to exist in the world. They packed the working unit into a shipping crate that afternoon, complete with a demonstration video they filmed using a borrowed camera from Jasmine's college. In the video, Walt introduced the prototype like a proud father. He explained how the aligned dock allowed for sub-5-second magnet lock-on, how it adjusted automatically for temperature variations, and how the load guidance system could be maintained by a two-person crew using simple diagnostics. Eric took over mid-video, explaining the digital sensors, the self-leveling control, and how the whole unit could be mass-produced using current supply chains. They kept it simple. No jargon. Just truth. Just usability. When the crate was finally sealed and picked up by courier that evening, Walt felt like something significant had ended, and something else had quietly begun. That night, over dinner, Walt and Eric sat on the porch while cicadas hummed in the trees and the sky melted into shades of navy and orange. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. The air around them was full of unspoken repair. Walt sipped his coffee and finally broke the silence. "You remember that science fair in '91? The one where your levitating train model won third place?" Eric smirked. "You mean the one I forgot to plug in before the judges came by?" "That's the one," Walt said, chuckling. "Still beat two kids with baking soda volcanoes." Eric leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "I remember you drove me back and forth to the school all week just so I could run tests on the track. You didn't say much, but I knew you were proud." Walt looked down at the coffee in his hands, then back up at his son. "I was. I still am." The words landed like rain on parched earth. Eric didn't look away. "I never stopped thinking about that model. Even when I left. Even when I was pretending none of this mattered." "It always mattered," Walt said. "Even when it didn't make sense." The porch grew quieter, but somehow fuller. Like something hollow had been filled. When Eric left that night to head home, Walt watched him walk down the path and disappear into the dark, his figure solid, no longer weighed down by distance. Inside, Walt sat down at his desk, opened his email, and found a message from Dr. Voss waiting. Subject: next step. He clicked it. Walt, prototype received. Testing begins Monday at the Columbus integration site. We've reviewed the demo footage. It's being shared with our public-private funding partners. If results are consistent, this moves into Phase 2, pilot station installation. We'll need you and Eric on call for field integration. Congratulations, you've changed the station game. Walt exhaled slowly, his heart heavy and light at once. He reread the last sentence, over and over, you've changed the station game. It didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like fact. He sat there, stunned and still, the room around him hushed except for the whir of a fan and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then he opened a new document, wrote the words, Phase 2, and began listing everything they'd need for station implementation, modular brackets, safety redundancies, diagnostics tools, service manuals. He wasn't waiting for a green light. He was already moving. That weekend, Walt took the original '83 blueprint and framed it in an old oak frame he found at the flea market. He hung it on the garage wall, just above the workbench, not as a symbol of nostalgia but as proof, some dreams take longer to land. Jasmine stopped by that afternoon with two of her classmates, engineering students who'd been following Walt's project updates. She introduced them like family. This is Chris and Melody, she said. They want to help you with CAD cleanup and material sourcing. Chris reached out to shake Walt's hand. Sir, it's an honor. We studied your frictionless clamp render in class last week. Melody added, we're both applying for Aurora internships. Just seeing this in person is kind of amazing. Walt waved them into the garage. Well then, he said, grinning, let me show you what we're really building. Over the next few hours, they helped him digitize diagrams, prep component orders, and test variations of the bracket tensioning system. They worked like a real team, laughing, arguing over tolerances, celebrating when a simulation landed below the threshold. Walt watched them, not just the intelligence, but the fire. The same fire he once carried. The same fire he still had. When they left, he stood alone in the quiet garage and stared at the framed blueprint on the wall. The caption he'd added beneath it, written in his own pen, read, started 1983. Finished whenever it's done. The Hyperloop wasn't finished. The Align dock wasn't finished. But for the first time in his life, Walt Harris didn't need to finish something to feel fulfilled. He was in it. Present. Building. Seen. And most importantly, moving forward. Not with speed, but with purpose. Elon Musk once said, some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Walt knew now, change wasn't disaster. It was the slow and stubborn belief that tomorrow could still be built by people like him. Walt woke to the glow of dawn filtering through the window shades, the world outside already humming with early morning energy while his mind buzzed with questions about the upcoming integration test in Columbus. He dressed deliberately, shirt clean, coffee hot, and made his way to the garage where the Align dock version 1.0 prototype sat waiting like a quiet promise. Eric was already there, hunched over a laptop, making final tweaks to the sensor firmware. They exchanged a nod, no words yet, only shared recognition that today was bigger than both of them. They loaded the unit carefully into the truck bed together, mechanisms and wiring packed securely alongside their morale. The Align dock had become more than a machine, it was a conversation in metal and magnetism, a bridge between quiet dreams and the momentum building just beyond their driveway. Halfway to Columbus, Walt checked his watch and exhaled through the open window, absorbing the rhythm of the highway, the blur of barns and telephone lines, the middling dawn light painting everything in hopeful gold. He glanced at Eric, who was reviewing the logistic email again, checking the site layout, noting possible temperature swings. They'd prepared as best they could. He thought back to Elon Musk's words, some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. And felt those lines pulse under his skin, a reminder that stagnation was a trap no aging dreamer could afford. And he'd chosen to move. When they arrived at the Columbus integration site, a chilly breeze greeted them along with the expectant hum of technicians, engineers, and press members filing in. The setup crew guided them to a clean bay decked out with testing gear and monitoring stations. Walt carried the Align dock to its spot and set it between two staging modules representing Hyperloop connector arms. The assembly team, some professional engineers, others interns, looked at him with a mix of respect and awe. He tightened one bolt, checked the rail alignment, tested the magnet sequencing. Each step was precise but human. Then the test began. A foam mock pod rolled slowly onto the dock. Lights flickered, sensors responded, and nearly soundlessly the magnet clamp aligned, nudged, locked. The pod slipped forward, paused, then lifted slightly as the magnetic interface took full load. The system held perfectly. The monitor lit green. Walt held his breath until applause began, first polite, then genuine. Engineers exchanged handshake nods, someone looked at the data readout and smiled wide. The integration lead approached, eyes misting. "Mr. Harris, Eric, you did it. This dock works under simulation and now in real deployment. You've saved us months of iterative redesign." Walt let the words settle, they felt like something bigger than praise, recognition. He turned toward his son. Eric nodded, not smiling widely, but there, water in his eyes. Walt squeezed his shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. "Together." They spent the afternoon reviewing graphs, fault tolerance ranges, sensor redundancy feedback, environmental stress tests for heat, cold, humidity. It wasn't smooth sailing, there were minor drift issues at sub-zero temps, some calibration lag, but nothing unfixable. For every glitch, the team brainstormed on the spot. They covered variables, drawn schematics, toggled code tweaks. Walt realized, these weren't mistakes. They were steps towards something real. At day's end, Dr. Voss gathered everyone in the staging bay and said, "This dock, your dock, is moving to pilot production. We're proposing to install a field-ready unit at the first Hyperloop station built in the Midwest Pilot Corridor. It will bear your name in our internal documentation, the Harris Align module. It's not just a prototype anymore, it's a commitment." Walt felt his heart swung again, settled on a quiet kind of joy. He didn't think about the years that came before, only the now, the clang of the bay door closing, the quiet hum of machinery, the promise of circuits and steel fulfilling purpose. Back at home that night, the house dark except for lamp glow, he walked to the garage and traced his fingers across the rail of Align dock version 1.0, now mounted on a test rig. That blueprint from '83 hung above like a ghost that became a map. He thought, change is hard. But worse than change is nothing changing at all. He rose early to pen a brief message to Eric, lead engineer, Phase 2 pilot station, and hit send. His son replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a line, "Proud of us." In the warm hush of the garage, that small message felt like legacy. Walt turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked into tomorrow with more than hope. He walked with purpose renewed, proof that no one's too old to reboot, rebuild, and rejoin the flow of change, especially when the alternative is standing still. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first pilot station wasn't just a test site, it was a symbol. Walt found himself standing at the edge of the sprawling Midwest Transit hub, the concrete and steel bathed in early morning light that made every beam and panel gleam like a promise. The Hyperloop project, once a distant dream scribbled in a faded garage blueprint, was now a tangible part of America's future. Walt's hand still trembled slightly as he looked around, feeling the weight of every year, every missed opportunity, every quiet regret that had led him here. He wasn't just an engineer, he was a living testament to persistence. Walking along the platform, he noticed the clean lines of the Harris Align module integrated seamlessly into the docking bay. The magnetic clamps sat ready to catch pods traveling at near supersonic speeds, a design that balanced precision with simplicity. Nearby, Eric was huddled over a tablet, running last-minute diagnostics. "Everything's green," Eric said without looking up. "Temperature controls are holding steady. Sensors synced with central AI." Walt nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "Feels like the future is finally catching up." Around them, the station buzzed with technicians, engineers, and city officials, all caught in the thrill of this groundbreaking moment. The news crews circled, microphones ready, eager to capture the human story behind the engineering marvel. Walt found himself thinking of Elon Musk again, how he'd spoken about thinking from first principles, and the bravery it took to challenge assumptions. This wasn't just about speed, it was about rewriting the rules, about turning impossible into inevitable. The first pod arrived in a hush of anticipation. Sleek, silver, and humming with electric life, it glided onto the Harris-aligned module with surgical precision. The magnetic clamps engaged, holding it steady as the system ran through safety checks. The countdown began, and with a subtle pulse, the pod accelerated smoothly away down the test track, leaving behind a trail of excitement and hope. Walt caught Jasmine's eye in the crowd. She was grinning ear to ear, pride shining bright. He thought of all the nights spent alone in this garage, wrestling with old blueprints, wrestling with doubt, and how that doubt had been replaced by determination. Later that afternoon, Walt found himself invited to speak at a gathering of engineers and city leaders. He cleared his throat and shared not just technical details but the story of a man who refused to let age be a cage, who believed that no matter the years behind you, there's always a road forward. "It's about the relentless refusal to accept limits," Walt said, voice steady but full of emotion. "It's about building something that matters, not just for ourselves but for those who come after. Elon Musk inspired me to see the impossible not as a wall, but as a challenge. And today, here at this station, we're proving that challenge can be met." The crowd applauded, many wiping tears or nodding knowingly. Afterward, a young engineer approached him, wide-eyed and earnest. "Mr. Harris, your story, it's inspiring. I'm 28, and sometimes I feel like the weight of expectations is crushing. But you remind me it's never too late to start something big." Walt smiled gently. "It's never too late. Keep moving." That night, back at home, Walt sat in his favorite chair, gazing at the framed blueprints on the wall. The long road from a faded garage sketch to a living, breathing part of America's future wasn't just about technology. It was about faith in the future itself, in the power of resilience, in the idea that every person, no matter their age, has a role to play in shaping what comes next. He thought of his father, who had once told him, "Walt, you've got fire in you. Don't ever let it go out." And now, decades later, that fire was blazing brighter than ever. He sent a message to Eric, "Tomorrow, we start planning Phase 3. The nation's watching." Eric replied, "Let's make history." Walt leaned back, breathing deep, knowing that this was no longer just a project. It was a legacy, a story of renewal, of courage, and the unstoppable power of daring to change. The days following the pilot station launch felt surreal for Walt. The media spotlight illuminated a world he hadn't expected to step into at his age, a world where curiosity and skepticism danced in equal measure. His phone buzzed with interview requests, invitations to conferences, and messages from engineers eager to collaborate. But amidst the whirlwind, Walt found himself craving something simpler, genuine connection. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints in the garage, his phone rang. It was Melissa, his daughter, calling for the first time in months. Her voice was tentative but warm. "Dad, I saw the news. The pilot station, the Harris-aligned module. I'm proud of you." Walt's throat tightened. Years of silence and distance had formed a wall between them, but here, in this moment, it felt like a door creaked open. "I'm proud of you too, Melissa," he replied softly. Maybe we can talk more." They agreed to meet the following weekend for coffee, a small but significant step toward rebuilding what time had worn thin. As Walt hung up, a sense of hope blossomed within him. Meanwhile, the Hyperloop project surged ahead. Phase 3 involved designing full-scale stations and refining passenger experience. Walt found himself working closely with industrial designers and urban planners, transforming steel and circuits into welcoming spaces where travelers would feel safe and inspired. One evening, late in the office, he paused to reflect on the journey. The Hyperloop had become more than a transportation system, it was a symbol of possibility, of resilience, of rewriting expectations at any age. Eric approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You okay?" he asked gently. Walt smiled, accepting the cup. "I am. More than okay." The conversation turned to Elon Musk, whose audacious vision had been the catalyst for everything. "You know," Eric said, he once said, "when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Walt nodded. "That's what keeps me going." Days later, Walt found himself invited to a panel discussing innovation and aging. On stage, facing a room filled with younger engineers and entrepreneurs, he shared his story, not just the technical triumphs but the emotional battles. He spoke of loneliness, regret, and the fear of becoming invisible. "But," he said, "Elon Musk reminded me that age is not a cage but a lens. Experience is power. Fear is a challenge to overcome, not a stop sign." The audience responded with standing ovations and heartfelt questions. A young woman approached afterward, eyes shining. "Thank you for showing us it's never too late." Walt realized then that his journey was touching lives beyond the Hyperloop itself. It was sparking courage in others. Back home, the meeting with Melissa unfolded slowly but meaningfully. Over coffee, they shared memories and frustrations, laughter and tears. It was messy but honest, a healing in progress. Walt felt the heavy weight of regret lighten just a little, replaced by the promise of new beginnings. In the quiet of the night, as he sat alone in the garage, Walt pulled out the worn photo of his younger self with a model train, proof that dreams can stretch across decades and still ignite a future. Elon Musk's voice echoed in his mind, a reminder that radical change often begins with small, fearless steps. Walt smiled, knowing that the Hyperloop wasn't just about travel, it was about the journey within. And his journey was far from over. Walt stood at the edge of the new construction site, the crisp spring air carrying the scent of fresh concrete and possibilities. The Phase 3 stations were beginning to rise from the earth, skeletal frameworks stretching toward the sky like the first breaths of a new era. It was hard to believe that less than 2 years ago, this was nothing but a field of grass and wildflowers. Now, it was the proving ground for a vision that was no longer just his but America's. As he walked through the site, hard hat snug on his head, he reflected on how far he had come, from tinkering alone in a quiet garage to overseeing a team of engineers, architects, and city planners committed to building the future. The buzz of machinery mixed with the clatter of workers and the occasional whistle from a foreman created a symphony of progress. Walt's thoughts drifted to Elon Musk's early words about the Hyperloop project, words that had been a lifeline when doubts threatened to engulf him. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Those words had fueled late nights, stubborn reworking of designs, and countless conversations with skeptical officials. Here, on this site, those odds were being defied. Inside the nearby temporary trailer, Walt and Eric pored over blueprints and schedules, tracking milestones and troubleshooting delays. Eric pointed out a snag in the magnetic coupling system, something minor but critical, and they huddled with the technical team, brainstorming solutions that balanced innovation with reliability. Walt marveled at how the younger engineers leaned into challenges with a fearless curiosity that reminded him of his own youth, tempered now with the wisdom of decades. He thought of the generations before and after him, connected through a shared commitment to progress. Later that week, Walt received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national summit on aging and innovation. The invitation came with a note quoting Elon Musk himself, "If the rules are such that you can't make progress, then you have to fight the rules." Walt accepted, seeing it as an opportunity not just to discuss technology but to challenge the narrative about aging in America. The day of the summit, Walt stepped onto the stage amid applause and curious eyes. He spoke candidly about the fears that come with growing older, the sense of invisibility, the whispers of "too late." He shared how Elon Musk's fearless approach to challenges had inspired him to rewrite his own story. "Innovation isn't the domain of the young," Walt declared. "It's the birthright of anyone willing to embrace change and defy expectations." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations that extended well beyond the event. Back at home, Walt's relationship with Melissa continued to heal. They worked on a project together, building a community garden in their neighborhood, a tangible symbol of renewal and growth. It wasn't just about plants, it was about planting seeds of connection and hope. One afternoon, as Walt dug into the earth, Melissa smiled and said, "You know, Dad, I never imagined we'd find our way back like this." Walt wiped sweat from his brow and replied, "Neither did I. But here we are, still growing." The garden flourished alongside the Hyperloop stations, each a testament to the power of persistence. Walt found joy in these moments, understanding that legacy was as much about relationships as it was about inventions. As construction progressed, Walt encountered resistance, bureaucratic red tape, funding challenges, and public skepticism. But with each hurdle, he recalled Elon Musk's tenacity and willingness to challenge norms. He rallied his team, reminding them that every breakthrough required pushing beyond comfort zones. In quiet moments, Walt also faced his own physical limits, aches, fatigue, the slow reminders that time was a relentless force. Yet, rather than surrender, he used these moments to reflect on the value of resilience. One evening, he wrote in his journal, "Age is not the enemy. Fear is. And fear can be overcome." With that resolve, Walt doubled down on mentoring young engineers, sharing not just technical knowledge but the mindset that had carried him through. He hosted workshops and informal talks, encouraging others to view obstacles as opportunities. Slowly, the Hyperloop project became a community, not just a technology. It was a movement fueled by intergenerational collaboration and shared dreams. Months later, as the first Phase 3 station neared completion, Walt stood with Eric and Melissa, watching the sun set behind the gleaming structure. The station, sleek and modern, reflected light like a beacon of possibility. Walt felt a profound gratitude, for the past that shaped him, the present that challenged him, and the future that beckoned. He realized that his journey was not just about high-speed travel but about moving forward, always forward, no matter the age or the odds. And as he looked at the faces of those around him, he knew that legacy wasn't a finish line, it was the ongoing act of daring to change. The hum of activity at the new Midwest Hyperloop station grew louder each day, a testament to months of relentless work by hundreds of hands and minds. Walt walked the polished halls, his footsteps echoing softly on the sleek floors, feeling the pulse of a future he'd helped build. The station was more than steel and glass, it was a symbol of transformation, not just for transportation but for the people who had believed when belief was scarce. Standing near a massive window, Walt watched as engineers tested the latest pods, the sleek vessels sliding effortlessly onto the Harris-Align module, magnetic fields lifting them with barely a sound. He thought of Elon Musk's words, how visionaries must walk the fine line between stubbornness and flexibility, and realized he'd learned that lesson well. Progress required both persistence and openness to change. At a nearby conference room, Walt met with the leadership team, planning the final steps before the first public trial run. Concerns about safety, scheduling, and public reception buzzed through the air. Walt spoke calmly but firmly, "We have the data. We have the team. What we need now is faith, in ourselves and in the vision." Outside, Melissa was busy organizing a community event in the station's lobby, turning the sleek, modern space into a gathering place filled with laughter, music, and hopeful conversations. The event was designed to introduce local residents to the Hyperloop, to bridge the gap between technology and humanity. Walt watched her from across the room and felt a surge of pride mixed with a bittersweet nostalgia. how far they'd come from years of silence to this shared purpose. Later, as night fell and the station's lights cast long reflections on the glass, Walt found himself alone in the control room. The screens displayed pods in various stages of readiness, sensors streaming data, algorithms humming quietly. He pulled out a worn notebook, filled with sketches, notes, and reminders from the earliest days, and traced his finger along the pages. The line from Elon Musk echoed in his mind, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Walt embraced that truth. He remembered moments when prototypes failed, when systems glitched, and the hope that kept him moving forward. That hope was now a living reality. As the first public trial run approached, excitement mixed with tension. Walt was invited to speak at a press briefing, sharing his journey and the team's vision with the nation. Standing behind the podium, he looked out at the sea of cameras and reporters, feeling the gravity of the moment. This project started as a dream, he began, voice steady but filled with emotion. A dream inspired by courage and the refusal to accept limits. Today, we're taking a bold step toward a future where distance and time no longer define us. The crowd erupted in applause, but Walt's mind drifted back to the quiet moments, the doubts, the fears, the nights spent alone with blueprints. He thought of Elon Musk's relentless drive to challenge norms and how that had ignited his own fire. After the briefing, a young reporter approached, eyes bright. "Mr. Harris, what advice would you give to someone who feels it's too late to start?" Walt smiled softly. "It's never too late. The only thing standing between you and your next step is the courage to take it." The public trial day arrived with crisp autumn air and clear skies. Families, engineers, officials, and curious onlookers gathered as the first passengers prepared to board. Walt stood beside the Harris-Align module, heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nervousness. As the pod lifted smoothly and accelerated down the track, cheers erupted from the crowd. The journey was flawless, smooth, fast, and quiet. Passengers emerged smiling, exhilarated by the experience. The Hyperloop was no longer just a concept, it was a promise fulfilled. In the days that followed, Walt received messages from people across the country, letters, emails, calls, all inspired by the project and his story. Many shared their own struggles with age, loss, and doubt. Walt realized his work had become something larger than technology, it was a beacon for anyone daring to rewrite their own narrative. One evening, Melissa joined him in the garage, where the original Align Dock prototype still rested. She touched the metal gently, whispering, "You made this happen, Dad." Walt nodded, tears glistening. "We made it happen, together." As the Hyperloop expanded, Walt continued mentoring, speaking, and building community. He understood now that legacy wasn't just about the tracks laid or pods launched but about the courage to keep moving, no matter the obstacles or years behind you. In the quiet moments, he reflected on a life that had seemed ordinary but had become extraordinary through daring to change. Elon Musk's voice lingered in his heart, a call to innovation, resilience, and relentless hope. Walt smiled, ready for whatever came next. The buzz around the Hyperloop project was spreading beyond engineering circles and local media. National attention was growing, and Walt felt the weight of expectations mounting with every passing day. The challenge was no longer just about building the system, it was about proving it could transform the very fabric of American life. He found himself standing at a crossroads, balancing technical decisions with the emotional undercurrents that had always driven him. One afternoon, Walt sat in the bustling conference room filled with planners, policymakers, and economists debating the next phase of Hyperloop expansion. The question on everyone's mind was clear: how do you scale a revolutionary technology across a country built on tradition and inertia? Some argued for cautious incrementalism, others for aggressive rollout. Walt listened, absorbing every perspective, but his mind kept returning to Elon Musk's core philosophy. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. That was the moment when he realized that the path forward would require not just engineering genius but bold leadership. He raised his hand and spoke, we cannot let fear of failure or resistance to change dictate our future. The Hyperloop is more than infrastructure. It's a chance to redefine connection, opportunity, and hope for generations to come. The room fell silent, then erupted in thoughtful discussion. Walt's conviction sparked new energy, a reminder that progress often begins with courage. Outside the meeting, Melissa was organizing community workshops to educate and engage the public about Hyperloop benefits. Walt admired her commitment to building bridges between technology and everyday people. The project was no longer a solitary mission, it was a collective endeavor fueled by shared dreams. Back home, Walt's routine balanced between intense work sessions and moments of reflection. His body sometimes ached with the reminders of age, but his spirit remained unyielding. He often returned to the garage, the birthplace of his dreams, where blueprints and models surrounded him like old friends. One evening, while sketching new designs, his phone rang. It was Eric, with news from the development team. "Walt, we've run simulations on the new propulsion system. Results are promising, but we're hitting unexpected thermal limits." Walt frowned but didn't hesitate. "Let's convene the team. We'll figure this out." That problem-solving mindset was a hallmark of his transformation, from man haunted by doubts to leader driving innovation. The next days were a blur of brainstorming sessions, late-night calls, and tireless testing. Walt found solace in the persistence of his team and the shared belief that setbacks were simply steps on the path forward. Meanwhile, public interest grew as the first wave of trial rides received glowing feedback. Passengers marveled at the seamless blend of speed, comfort, and quiet. Stories flooded in of families reunited faster than ever, business opportunities unlocked by new connections, and a renewed sense of possibility. Walt read these testimonials with a swelling heart, reminded why he'd fought so hard to make the Hyperloop real. One particularly poignant letter arrived from a retired teacher in Kansas who wrote, "You've given me hope, not just for travel, but for life itself. At 70, I thought my best days were behind me. Watching your journey has shown me that it's never too late to dream." Walt shared the letter with Melissa, who squeezed his hand and said, "This is the real impact." As winter approached, the team faced increasing pressure to meet deadlines for the next phase launch. Walt balanced technical demands with the emotional toll it took on everyone, especially himself. But each challenge strengthened his resolve. He remembered Elon Musk's words about embracing risk and failure as necessary steps toward success. One cold evening, after a long day at the site, Walt stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The vastness of the sky reminded him of the limitless potential within all of us, if only we dared to reach. He whispered to himself, "It's not the years that count, but the fire that burns within." The following weeks were a whirlwind of progress. New stations opened, routes extended, and public enthusiasm soared. Walt found himself traveling frequently, visiting communities transformed by the Hyperloop's arrival. Each stop was a reminder that his journey was no longer solitary but part of a larger movement redefining the American dream. Yet, even amid success, Walt stayed grounded. He continued mentoring young engineers, speaking at schools, and sharing the story of his late start. His message was clear: innovation belongs to everyone willing to leap, no matter their age. At a conference in Chicago, Walt met a group of retirees inspired to start their own tech projects. They told him how his story had ignited a spark they thought had long faded. Walt felt a profound gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. Back home, as he reviewed plans for future expansions, Walt realized that the Hyperloop's true legacy would not be measured in miles of track or pods launched but in the lives touched and the barriers broken. He smiled, knowing that his journey, from doubt and loneliness to leadership and hope, was the real testament to the power of daring to change. As he prepared for a keynote address at a national innovation summit, Walt reflected on everything Elon Musk had symbolized for him. Radical thinking, relentless courage, and the refusal to accept limits. Walt was no longer just building a transportation system, he was helping America embrace a new chapter, one where age was not a cage but a catalyst, and the future was theirs to create. The morning light spilled softly through the window of Walt's study as he reviewed the latest progress reports on the Hyperloop expansion. The numbers told a story of rapid advancement, more miles of track laid, new routes connecting cities, and growing ridership exceeding projections. Yet Walt knew the true measure of success wasn't in statistics alone but in the human stories unfolding across the country. His mind wandered back to the small-town diner where he'd once felt invisible, a man resigned to fading into the background. Now, he was part of something bigger, something that was rewriting not just transportation but the narrative of what it meant to grow older and still dream boldly. That afternoon, Walt joined a virtual roundtable with engineers, city officials, and community leaders from around the nation. The topic was integration, how to weave Hyperloop stations seamlessly into existing infrastructure and communities. As participants discussed zoning laws, environmental concerns, and public outreach, Walt listened attentively. His decades of experience gave him a unique perspective bridging technical knowledge with human empathy. When it was his turn to speak, he emphasized the importance of designing stations as welcoming spaces, not cold terminals. "We're building more than transit hubs," he said. "We're creating places where people feel connected, to each other and to possibility." The roundtable concluded with renewed commitment, and Walt felt a surge of optimism. Back at home, Melissa greeted him with news of another community event, this one focused on job training and technology education for seniors. The Hyperloop wasn't just moving people faster. It was accelerating lives in unexpected ways. Walt volunteered to speak, eager to share his journey and encourage others to embrace change fearlessly. When the day arrived, he stood before a group of retirees, many skeptical but curious. He began with honesty about his own doubts and fears, how he'd once thought it was too late to start something new. "But I found that the only real barrier is the one we build inside ourselves," he said. "Age doesn't define us. Our choices do." The room filled with nods and tentative smiles. Questions followed, about learning new skills, overcoming physical challenges, balancing family responsibilities with reinvention. Walt answered with compassion, drawing on his own experience and the lessons learned from Elon Musk's relentless drive to challenge limits. As the session ended, a woman approached, eyes bright. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone," she said. Walt felt a familiar warmth, the quiet victory of connection. Meanwhile, back at the Hyperloop sites, technical challenges persisted. The new magnetic propulsion system required fine-tuning to optimize efficiency and safety. Walt worked closely with engineers, often staying late to review data and brainstorm solutions. One night, exhaustion settled heavily over him, but he pressed on, fueled by the knowledge that every breakthrough required sacrifice. During a particularly tough week, Walt received a call from Eric. "We've hit a snag with the cooling system," Eric explained. "If we don't fix it soon, it could delay the launch." Walt's voice remained steady. "Gather the team. We'll solve this. Failure is just a step toward success." That weekend, Walt invited several team members to the garage, turning the space into a makeshift war room. Ideas flew, some wild, some practical, as they tested prototypes and ran simulations. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, a modification inspired by a decades-old cooling technique Walt remembered from his early engineering days. The system stabilized, and progress resumed. The victory was sweet but tempered by the reality of ongoing challenges. Walt understood that innovation was a marathon, not a sprint. Amidst the technical trials, Walt also faced personal reflections. He found himself revisiting old photo albums, memories of a younger man full of dreams yet burdened by fear. He thought of his estranged friends, of paths not taken, and the weight of years. But alongside the melancholy was a growing sense of peace, a recognition that transformation was possible at any stage. One quiet evening, Walt penned a letter to Melissa, expressing gratitude for their renewed relationship and the journey they'd shared. He wrote, "I was never too old. I was just waiting to believe that I mattered." The letter marked a turning point, a declaration of hope and renewed purpose. As winter turned to spring, Walt traveled to Washington, D.C., to meet with lawmakers advocating for Hyperloop-friendly policies. The discussions were intense, debates about regulation, funding, and national priorities. Walt spoke passionately about the project's potential to revitalize communities, reduce environmental impact, and create economic opportunity. He emphasized the human side of innovation, the power to inspire, connect, and uplift. The trip was exhausting but rewarding. Walt returned home with a sense that the movement he'd helped ignite was gaining unstoppable momentum. At a celebratory dinner with his team, Walt raised a glass and said, "We're not just building a transportation system. We're building a future where anyone, at any age, can change the world." The room echoed with agreement and quiet pride. As he prepared for the next phase, the launch of cross-country routes, Walt reflected on the journey's emotional landscape. The loneliness, the doubt, the moments when giving up seemed easier. Now replaced by community, purpose, and a fierce determination. Elon Musk's voice lingered in his thoughts, a reminder to keep pushing boundaries, to embrace risk, and to believe fiercely in possibility. Walt smiled, knowing the best was yet to come. The spring air was thick with promise as Walt arrived at the sprawling Hyperloop test track on the outskirts of Denver. The site buzzed with energy, the hum of machinery mingling with the hopeful chatter of engineers and technicians. Today marked a milestone. The first fully operational cross-state run was scheduled, a bold leap toward connecting distant cities in mere minutes. Walt's heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of nerves. He had been here countless times before, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just a technical test, it was a symbol of everything he and the team had fought for. Innovation, perseverance, and the refusal to let age define limits. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the sleek tracks, which gleamed like silver ribbons threading through the rugged Colorado landscape. Walt watched as the pod, polished, aerodynamic, and humming softly, was prepped for launch. The engineers ran final checks, their faces tight with focus but shining with pride. Walt felt a familiar surge of emotion, hope mingled with the weight of responsibility. As the countdown began, the crowd gathered at the viewing platform fell silent. 3, 2, 1, launch. The pod accelerated with barely a sound, lifting gently on magnetic levitation before shooting forward at breathtaking speed. Walt's eyes followed its path, heart swelling as data streamed in, velocity, stability, system health, all perfect. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a collective release of tension and triumph. The successful run was more than a technical achievement, it was proof that dreams seeded years ago could blossom against all odds. Later, Walt stood with his team in the control center, screens displaying real-time data and maps. Faces were flushed with excitement and relief. "We did it," Eric said simply. Walt nodded, but his mind was already racing toward what came next, expanding routes, improving safety, and scaling access. The path was long, but the future was unfolding before them. That evening, back in his modest office, Walt reflected on the journey. He thought about the moments of doubt, the missed opportunities, and the loneliness that had once defined his days. Now those shadows felt distant, replaced by a fierce belief in the power of transformation at any age. He recalled a quote from Elon Musk that had guided him: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Walt realized he'd embodied that truth, pushing past fear and inertia to help build something extraordinary. The next weeks were filled with a whirlwind of activity: media interviews, community forums, policy meetings, and technical fine-tuning. Walt moved between these worlds with practiced grace, always returning to the core message: the Hyperloop was about connecting people, creating opportunity, and redefining what was possible. During a visit to a small town newly linked by the Hyperloop, Walt met with residents whose lives had been transformed. A farmer shared how faster access to markets had revitalized his business. A teacher spoke of new educational opportunities for her students. A retiree told Walt his project gave her hope to start a new chapter in life. Each story deepened Walt's sense of purpose, reminding him why he'd persevered through years of uncertainty. Yet challenges remained. Opposition from traditional transportation industries, regulatory hurdles, and occasional technical glitches tested the team's resolve. Walt faced criticism in media columns questioning the project's viability and cost. But rather than retreat, he leaned into the scrutiny, using it as fuel to communicate more clearly and work harder. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Walt sat with Melissa and shared his frustrations. "Sometimes it feels like we're swimming against a tidal wave," he admitted. Melissa squeezed his hand gently. "Remember why you started. Remember who you've become." Those words anchored Walt, renewing his determination to push forward despite obstacles. At a national innovation conference, Walt delivered a keynote that resonated deeply. He spoke candidly about aging, reinvention, and the courage to embrace change. "We are not defined by the number of years behind us, but by the impact we choose to make," he said. His message inspired many, sparking conversations about how society values experience and innovation across all ages. In the months that followed, Walt continued to balance technical leadership with advocacy and mentorship. He helped launch programs encouraging older adults to engage with technology, emphasizing lifelong learning and adaptability. His story became a beacon for those feeling left behind or too old to change. One chilly autumn morning, Walt received a letter that touched him deeply. It was from a woman who had watched his journey unfold on a local news segment. She wrote, "Your story gave me permission to believe again, to start a small business, to reconnect with my family, and to find joy in new challenges. Thank you." Walt read the letter slowly, feeling a swell of gratitude and humility. He realized the Hyperloop was not just a physical structure connecting cities, it was a bridge to renewed purpose and connection for countless lives. As the project moved closer to nationwide implementation, Walt prepared for the next big challenge, expanding access to underserved communities. He worked with policymakers and nonprofit leaders to ensure the Hyperloop would be inclusive, affordable, and transformative for all. The vision of a connected, equitable America drove him forward, even when fatigue whispered for rest. Late one night, sitting alone in the quiet of his study, Walt contemplated the road traveled. From a man once burdened by regret and isolation, he had grown into a leader fostering hope and change. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had proven that it was never too late to rewrite your story. He smiled softly, whispering a final thought to himself. This is only the beginning. The hum of activity at the Hyperloop Control Center never seemed to cease, even as the nation slowly adjusted to this new era of transportation. Walt found himself at the heart of a revolution not just in technology but in mindset. Communities once isolated by distance were now linked by invisible threads of speed and connection. Walt often marveled at the way the Hyperloop was reshaping American life, economies revitalized, families reunited, and dreams rekindled across age and geography. Yet, beneath the surface of success, new challenges emerged, challenges that tested the very essence of the project and the man who had become its unlikely champion. One morning, Walt arrived early at the site to meet with a group of engineers focused on enhancing safety protocols. Their task was monumental, ensuring the system could withstand extreme weather, unexpected emergencies, and human error. As they discussed scenarios and solutions, Walt listened carefully, reminding himself that innovation was a continuous process, never complete. The stakes were high, failure was not an option. During a break, Walt's phone buzzed with a message from Melissa, news of a community workshop in Ohio where seniors had gathered to learn about Hyperloop technology and discuss ways to get involved. Walt smiled, heartened by the grassroots enthusiasm spreading across the country. These workshops were becoming safe spaces where older adults could share their fears and hopes about change, technology, and the future. That afternoon, Walt joined a panel at a university conference on aging and innovation. He shared his journey from feeling forgotten and too old to make a difference to becoming a leader pushing the boundaries of possibility. The audience listened intently as he spoke about the intersection of age, technology, and purpose. The biggest barrier we face isn't technology or policy, Walt said. It's the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we can do. The session sparked lively discussion, with many expressing a newfound belief that their age was a strength, not a limitation. Back at headquarters, Walt and his team faced a new technical hurdle, integrating the Hyperloop with existing transportation networks in dense urban areas. The complexity was daunting, requiring collaboration with city planners, transit authorities, and environmental experts. Walt convened brainstorming sessions that blended technical rigor with creative thinking. We need to design not just for efficiency but for community, he urged. Our goal is to enhance lives, not just move people faster. The process was iterative and sometimes frustrating, but progress came through persistent effort and a shared vision. One evening, as Walt reviewed designs late into the night, his thoughts drifted to his younger self, filled with ambition but shackled by doubt. Now, decades later, he saw those early struggles as essential chapters in his story of transformation. The Hyperloop was as much a testament to human resilience as it was to engineering prowess. Just as Elon Musk's boldness had inspired him, Walt hoped his journey would inspire others to rewrite their own narratives, no matter their age or circumstance. Amidst the technical and societal challenges, Walt also faced moments of personal reflection. He found solace in daily walks through a nearby park, where the changing seasons mirrored the cycles of his life. On one such walk, he paused to watch a group of children playing, their laughter echoing like a promise. He thought about the future he was helping to build, a future where age was not a barrier but a bridge to new adventures. Walt's family, once distant, had begun to reconnect. His daughter, initially skeptical of his late-life reinvention, now expressed pride and curiosity about the Hyperloop's impact. Their conversations, once strained, grew warmer and more frequent. Walt treasured these moments, recognizing that his transformation extended beyond professional achievement to healing fractured relationships. As the project approached nationwide launch, Walt was invited to participate in a documentary highlighting innovators over 60 who were changing the world. Filming brought him face-to-face with other remarkable individuals who had defied expectations and carved new paths later in life. Sharing stories and struggles, Walt felt a deep kinship and renewed motivation. The documentary's release sparked widespread conversation about aging, innovation, and the power of purpose. Letters and messages poured in from viewers who found hope and inspiration in Walt's story. One note stood out. A man from rural Alabama wrote, "You've shown me that it's never too late to build something meaningful. Thank you for lighting the way." Walt kept the letter on his desk, a tangible reminder of the ripple effect of courage. However, the path was not without setbacks. A major technical malfunction during a routine test sent the pod off course briefly, causing alarms and a temporary halt in operations. The incident drew intense media scrutiny, with critics questioning the project's safety and feasibility. Walt addressed the public calmly and transparently, emphasizing the team's commitment to safety and continuous improvement. "Innovation carries risk, but standing still is a greater danger," he said in a televised interview. Behind the scenes, the team worked tirelessly to diagnose and fix the issue. Walt's leadership during the crisis reaffirmed his belief that vulnerability and honesty were as crucial as technical skill in building trust and progress. As the year drew to a close, Walt stood on the stage at a national technology summit, delivering a speech that felt like a personal testament. He spoke of fear, failure, and the unexpected power of reinvention. He thanked Elon Musk, not just for the Hyperloop vision but for embodying the fearless spirit that had sparked Walt's transformation. The applause was warm and heartfelt. Later, Walt returned home to Melissa, who greeted him with a knowing smile. Together, they reflected on the journey, its challenges, victories, and the uncertain but hopeful horizon ahead. Walt realized that the Hyperloop project was more than infrastructure, it was a living story of human potential, resilience, and the courage to dream anew. He felt ready to embrace whatever came next, confident that age was no barrier but a source of strength. "This is not the end," he said quietly. "It's only the beginning." The dawn was crisp and clear as Walt stood on the platform of the newly completed Hyperloop station in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The gleaming structure was a testament to years of relentless work and the bold vision that had carried him from a life shadowed by regret to one filled with purpose. Around him, travelers bustled, young professionals, families, retirees, each carrying their own stories, hopes, and destinations. Walt felt a profound connection to this moment, as if the very air around him was charged with possibility. The Hyperloop wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a lifeline weaving together disparate threads of American life. He watched as a mother lifted her toddler into the sleek pod, her smile a silent promise of new adventures. Nearby, an elderly couple clasped hands, embarking on a journey they'd long dreamed of. Walt remembered how not long ago, he himself had felt left behind, too old to chase fresh dreams. Now, he was part of something transforming not only landscapes but hearts. That afternoon, Walt was invited to meet with community leaders and local business owners eager to discuss the Hyperloop's impact on Tulsa's economy and culture. Sitting in a sunlit conference room overlooking the city skyline, Walt listened as ideas flowed. Plans for revitalizing downtown districts, expanding educational programs, and creating jobs. He shared stories from other towns and cities along the route, emphasizing that technology was only one piece of the puzzle. Our true goal, he said, is to build bridges between people, ideas, and opportunities. The room nodded in agreement, energized by the shared vision. Later, Walt visited a local high school where students had been learning about the Hyperloop through a new STEM curriculum. Walking through classrooms filled with eager faces and curious questions, Walt was struck by the enthusiasm radiating from the next generation. He saw reflections of his younger self, hungry for knowledge but unsure where it might lead. "You have the power to shape the future," he told the students. "Don't let anyone tell you it's too late to dream big." As the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the city, Walt found a quiet moment on the station's rooftop garden. He gazed out at the sprawling landscape, thinking about the path that had brought him here. The lonely nights, the doubts, the small victories that had piled up into something extraordinary. He thought about Elon Musk, not just as a symbol of innovation but as a reminder that boundaries were meant to be challenged. Walt reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, an old picture of himself in his 20s, eyes bright but uncertain. He smiled softly, feeling the distance between that young man and the one who stood here now. It wasn't just the years that had changed him, but the willingness to fight for purpose, connection, and growth. As twilight settled, Walt received a call from Eric, his trusted colleague. "We've just received the final approval to start the next phase, the cross-country expansion," Eric announced, excitement evident in his voice. Walt's heart soared. The vision was becoming reality, spreading across America like wildfire. That night, back in his cozy home, Walt sat with Melissa, sharing the day's triumphs and challenges. They talked late into the evening, reflecting on how far they'd come and the promise ahead. Walt felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the people who had supported him, the lessons learned, and the chance to redefine what aging meant. In the following weeks, Walt traveled extensively, visiting new Hyperloop sites and meeting diverse communities. Each stop deepened his conviction that this project was more than steel and magnets, it was a catalyst for hope and transformation. In a small town in Nebraska, he met a group of seniors who had launched a Hyperloop-inspired cooperative, combining technology training with local entrepreneurship. Their resilience and creativity inspired Walt, reminding him that change was possible everywhere, regardless of size or location. Yet, despite the momentum, Walt remained grounded. He knew that with progress came responsibility, to ensure the technology was accessible, equitable, and sustainable. He pushed for partnerships with nonprofits and government agencies to address these goals, always mindful that the Hyperloop's success depended on lifting all voices. One afternoon, while preparing for a speech at a National Innovation Summit, Walt received unexpected news, an invitation to meet Elon Musk himself. The message was brief but electrifying, an opportunity to discuss the future of the Hyperloop and the broader vision they shared. Walt's mind raced with excitement and nerves. Meeting the man whose daring ideas had sparked his own transformation felt surreal. The day of the meeting arrived, and Walt found himself in a sleek conference room at Tesla's headquarters. Elon Musk greeted him warmly, his intensity tempered by a rare moment of genuine curiosity. They spoke for hours, about technology, dreams, failures, and the unyielding drive to push boundaries. Elon praised Walt's leadership and resilience, calling him a symbol of what it meant to reinvent oneself at any stage. "You embody the spirit that keeps progress alive," Elon said. Walt felt a swell of pride mixed with humility. Their conversation lingered in his mind long after he left, fueling a renewed commitment to the Hyperloop's mission. Back home, Walt shared the experience with Melissa, who saw a new light in his eyes, a rekindled fire for the work ahead. As winter approached, Walt reflected on the cycle of seasons and life. The Hyperloop project had become his legacy, but more importantly, it was a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal. He thought about the millions who would travel these routes, the communities revitalized, and the barriers broken. Most of all, he thought about himself, the man who had once felt invisible and forgotten, now a beacon of hope for many. One evening, Walt penned a letter to the readers and listeners who had followed his story. He wrote, "I was never too old to start again. I was simply waiting for permission to believe in myself. If you're reading this, know that your time is now. The future is yours to build." The letter resonated widely, shared across social media and community forums, inspiring countless others to embrace change and purpose. As the new year dawned, Walt stood once more on the platform of a Hyperloop station, watching as the first cross-country passenger pod prepared for launch. The moment felt both personal and historic, a culmination of years of dedication, courage, and belief. The pod glided forward, a symbol of speed and connection, carrying with it the dreams of a nation and the promise that it's never too late to transform your life. Walt smiled, heart full, knowing that the journey was far from over. This was not an end but a new beginning for America, for the Hyperloop, and for anyone willing to defy limitations and embrace the future. The national media buzzed with excitement as the Hyperloop's cross-country expansion entered its final stages. Walt, once a man shadowed by doubts and regrets, now stood as a symbol of relentless innovation and the power of transformation. The project had grown beyond mere transportation, it was a movement redefining what it meant to age, to contribute, and to dream anew. On a brisk morning in Chicago, Walt arrived at the city's bustling new Hyperloop terminal, a place where gleaming steel and glass merged with the pulse of urban life. The station was alive with travelers, vendors, and curious onlookers, all drawn into the promise of a future once thought impossible. Walt moved through the crowd with a sense of quiet pride, knowing that each journey embarked here was a step toward uniting a diverse and sprawling nation. As he toured the facility, Walt met with a group of seniors volunteering to assist passengers, many of whom had found renewed purpose through involvement with the Hyperloop community. Their stories were powerful, tales of rediscovery, empowerment, and the joy of contributing to something bigger than themselves. Walt listened, humbled and inspired. One woman, a retired nurse named Grace, shared how the Hyperloop had reignited her passion for caregiving, volunteering to help elderly travelers navigate the new system. Her smile was radiant, a living testament to the project's ripple effect. Later, Walt joined a panel discussion focused on the economic and social impact of the Hyperloop. Experts debated its potential to reshape industries, reduce environmental footprints, and foster equity. Walt emphasized the importance of inclusivity, reminding the audience that technology should serve all Americans, regardless of age, background, or geography. "Innovation without access is progress without purpose," he said, his voice steady and earnest. Outside the conference hall, a young entrepreneur approached Walt with a proposal for a startup aimed at developing complementary technologies to enhance the Hyperloop experience. Their conversation sparked ideas and connections, illustrating the fertile ground the project had created for new ventures and collaborations. That evening, as the city lights twinkled below his hotel window, Walt reflected on the intertwining threads of progress and humanity. The Hyperloop was more than a marvel of engineering, it was a catalyst for hope, bridging divides and creating pathways where none had existed. Yet, he knew the journey was far from over. In the days that followed, Walt traveled to several cities along the expanded route, witnessing firsthand the transformative effects on communities large and small. In a rural town in Kansas, he met a group of farmers who had gained access to broader markets, increasing their incomes and sustainability. Their gratitude was palpable, their resilience inspiring. In a Detroit neighborhood once marked by decline, the Hyperloop station had sparked revitalization, new businesses, cultural events, and a renewed sense of pride. Walt walked the streets, feeling the pulse of renewal and the weight of responsibility to nurture it. Throughout these travels, Walt remained grounded in the lessons of his own transformation, the doubts he had wrestled with, the fears he had overcome, and the simple yet profound choice to keep moving forward. He shared these reflections in speeches and interviews, weaving a narrative of hope and empowerment that resonated widely. Back at headquarters, Walt worked closely with engineers, policymakers, and community leaders to address ongoing challenges, affordability, accessibility, and environmental sustainability. He championed initiatives to ensure the Hyperloop served not just the privileged but the many. These efforts required patience, compromise, and relentless advocacy, but Walt embraced the complexity, seeing it as part of the broader mission. One evening, after a particularly long day, Walt received a message that touched him deeply. It was from a man named James, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with isolation and purpose in his later years. James wrote that watching Walt's journey had given him courage to reconnect with his family and volunteer in his community. Walt's heart swelled with gratitude. This was the true measure of success. As the project approached full operational status, Walt prepared for a major public event, the official inauguration of the National Hyperloop Network. The ceremony was planned to be a celebration of innovation, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of reinvention. On the day of the event, thousands gathered at the Central Station in Denver, a city symbolic of the project's beginnings and ambitions. Walt stood on stage, the weight of years and experiences behind him, the hopes of a nation before him. He spoke with clarity and passion about the journey, his own and the country's. "We have proven that age is not a barrier but a bridge," he said. "That dreams deferred can be dreams reborn. And that together, we can build a future that honors our past while boldly embracing what's next." The crowd erupted in applause, a chorus of hope and determination. As the inaugural pod departed, Walt felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, a mix of joy, relief, and profound fulfillment. The path had been long and winding, but every step had been worth it. Later that evening, Walt and Melissa stood quietly on their porch, the city's glow a soft backdrop to their reflections. They spoke of the journey, the people touched, and the legacy unfolding. Walt realized that the project's true success lay not just in technology or infrastructure but in the lives changed and the spirits lifted. "I was never too old to make a difference," he said softly. "I was just waiting for the courage to begin." As the night deepened, Walt felt a deep peace. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but it was bright with possibility. The Hyperloop had become a symbol, not only of American ingenuity but of the power within each person to reinvent, reconnect, and renew. Walt knew his story was now intertwined with countless others, each contributing to the ongoing journey of transformation. And that was the greatest legacy of all. The first light of dawn spilled gently across Walt's study, casting long shadows over the pages of notes, designs, and letters that chronicled years of relentless effort. The room, filled with relics of a life transformed, an old photograph of a younger Walt, a signed Elon Musk quote framed on the wall, a miniature model of the Hyperloop pod, felt like a sanctuary of dreams realized. Walt sat quietly, reflecting on a journey that had once seemed impossible, marked by doubts, fears, and the ever-looming question, was it too late to change? Now, decades into this improbable adventure, he knew the answer with clarity. It was never too late. The Hyperloop was more than a feat of engineering or a leap forward in transportation, it was a symbol of human resilience and the power of daring to begin again. Walt remembered the moment that had ignited it all. The lonely kitchen table, the flickering news clip of Elon Musk unveiling his radical vision, and the spark it had lit inside a man who had felt forgotten by time. That spark had grown into a fire that burned away self-imposed limits and lit a path toward purpose. As the sun rose higher, Walt prepared for a visit to the Hyperloop Innovation Center, where a new generation of engineers, dreamers, and community leaders gathered to shape the next chapter. Walking through the vibrant halls filled with youthful energy and seasoned expertise, Walt marveled at the continuity of vision, the seamless blending of experience and innovation. At the center, he met with Jasmine, a bright engineer in her 30s whose work focused on expanding the Hyperloop's reach into underserved communities. They discussed new projects aimed at making the technology more affordable and accessible, ensuring that the promise of connection touched every corner of the nation. Jasmine's passion reminded Walt of his own early days, full of hope, unafraid of failure, and driven by the desire to create impact. He felt a deep sense of trust that the future was in capable hands. Later, Walt was invited to speak at a gathering celebrating the thousands of lives transformed by the Hyperloop. Among the attendees were families reunited, entrepreneurs launched, seniors rediscovering purpose, and communities revitalized. Walt listened as stories unfolded. Each a testament to courage, change, and the unexpected power of embracing the new. When it was his turn, Walt spoke not just about technology but about the human spirit. This project, he said, is a reminder that we are never truly defined by our past or our age. We are defined by the choices we make to keep moving forward, to keep believing in the possibility of better days. His words were met with applause, but more importantly, with a shared understanding that transcended generations. That evening, as Walt returned home, he paused to watch the twilight settle over the city. The Hyperloop tracks glinted softly in the fading light, silent ribbons connecting lives and dreams. He thought of his own journey, the fears overcome, the relationships mended, the legacy forged not in grandeur but in resilience and hope. Walt's phone buzzed with a message from his daughter, now more present and engaged than ever. She wrote, "Dad, your story changed how I see what's possible. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." Walt smiled, feeling the full circle of transformation. The next morning, Walt sat down to write a letter, not just to those who had followed his journey but to anyone who felt lost, forgotten, or too old to change. He wrote, "If you find yourself doubting your worth, your relevance, or your capacity to dream again, know this: the future is not reserved for the young. It is carved by those brave enough to believe in second chances, new beginnings, and the endless possibilities that come with perseverance. Age is a story, not a sentence. It is your canvas, your gift, and your call to action." As he penned these words, Walt felt a calm resolve settle over him. His story, intertwined with the Hyperloop's path, was a beacon for those willing to challenge the narratives that limit us. It was proof that transformation is possible at any stage, and that the courage to start is the greatest power we possess. In the weeks that followed, Walt took a quiet step back from the daily bustle of the project, focusing instead on mentorship and community engagement. He visited senior centers, shared his experiences in local libraries, and participated in programs that encouraged lifelong learning and reinvention. Each encounter reinforced his belief that age was not a barrier but a bridge to wisdom, connection, and impact. One afternoon, during a community event, Walt was approached by a woman named Eleanor, a former schoolteacher in her 70s who had recently started volunteering with a Hyperloop outreach program. She told him, "Your journey gave me permission to try again, to learn, to teach, and to inspire. You've shown me that purpose doesn't fade, it evolves." Walt's heart swelled with gratitude. Moments like these were the true legacy of his work, living proof that the courage to change could ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. As the seasons turned, the Hyperloop continued to expand, evolving from a technological marvel to an integral part of American life and identity. Walt watched with quiet pride as the project fostered new communities, opportunities, and connections. The infrastructure was impressive, but more impressive was the transformation it inspired in people, young and old alike. One evening, as Walt sat by the fireplace with Melissa, he reflected on the words that had carried him through the darkest moments. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? He smiled, knowing the answer was no longer a question but a lived truth. They talked about the future, not just the Hyperloop's next phases, but the endless possibilities for reinvention that awaited every person willing to embrace change. Walt understood now that transformation was not a destination but a continuous journey, fueled by curiosity, courage, and connection. The final chapter of his story was still being written, and he welcomed it with open arms. Before turning in for the night, Walt gazed out his window at the stars, thinking about Elon Musk, the man who had sparked a revolution in transportation and, unknowingly, in Walt's own life. He felt a deep gratitude for that spark, a recognition that true change begins with a single idea and the boldness to pursue it. Walt whispered to the night, "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to matter, to build, to dream." As sleep embraced him, Walt carried with him the certainty that the future belonged not to the young or the old, but to those brave enough to reinvent themselves and dare greatly. His journey, the Hyperloop, and the countless lives touched by their union stood as a testament to the unyielding spirit of transformation. And the truth that every day offers a new beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?